think I have the slide I wanted to start with. So we start with a sheet. Dus we had a sheet, but actually an Excel sheet. The purpose of our conversation was not to get an Excel sheet, but I think we actually had this in mind as a vision, that we would have a think tank or a research institute or something that is maybe similar to what Derek Cabrera has here at Cornell. Dus that he worked together with his wife and lots of other people, and he developed this, I don't know whether it's a non-profit or whether it's a company, in which he's sharing all his knowledge about system science. And just they're kind of successful. I mean, that's all the companies I worked with. And here then they have all these little videos for people who want to learn more how to think in a systematic way. And so I think what is happening is that we are kind of wondering, is there something missing in the thinking of Cabrera that actually we can bring up as cyberneticians, or that you all can bring up as cyberneticians. And so this, I'm bringing up Cabrera as him being just the competition and or the benchmark, because it doesn't make sense to do exactly what he is doing. Of course, maybe it makes sense because he cannot do everything by himself. We need to wonder, are we the same or are we going to be slightly different? And it was for that purpose that this project kind of came into existence, after the realization that there were subtle differences in how each one of us was approaching cybernetics, and to kind of put these thoughts down on paper. And so now the very first challenge is, what is the best software to do this? And so it's 100% acknowledged that this Excel sheet is maybe horrible and very rigid and inflexible, but it's just like the starting point. And so we can move to better software as soon as there's some sort of collective understanding, because it needs to be something that the majority of you want to work with. So so it's not for me or a small group to make this decision. It's for all of you what the software is that really works best for most of us. So I started this with a one-page description, and that's thanks to Loot, who reminded the importance of having an entry point. And so the description kind of says the different stages, like to do now immediately. And there were two things to do kind of immediately. And this one is actually think about the question. Just before answering the questions, we need to first kind of agree that we have the important questions, and then so we can already answer them for ourselves, but we're not ready maybe to share them because we really need to agree that we have all the right questions. And I think this is something I would like to talk about today, like our focus, the presentation about today is whether we have the right questions. And then I also want to emphasize number 3 and step 3, and that is the terminology that we use, that has been taken for granted that everyone means exactly, literally the same thing with every word, and maybe we don't. And so that would be really helpful to just sort that out. And then
if I could just interject here in terms of stepping back, the purpose here is what Larry was talking about, creating a bridge between science, arts, and the crafts of the tool sets.
Yeah.
And in order to do that requires what the Macy meetings really accomplished, which was creating a common set of terminologies that allowed them to cross disciplines and make some major advances at least in the artifacts of information technology. And what we're doing right here is coming up with what are the terms we're using, how are you defining them to get a convergence? And then secondly, the questions that we are addressing that allow us to make sure that we are focusing on the right subjects and objects of our study.
Yeah, so that are the kind of just the two or the three steps for now, and then I just want to give a quick preview of what comes afterwards.
Maybe, Jaimi, it would be useful to give an example.
I will do that in a minute, but I just want to first draw the bigger picture, and the bigger picture is that we actually start comparing and discussing our differences, and then maybe invite some other people. But then further down the road, this is all about doing like something for the public, or it doesn't have to be, people don't have to join the last step, but is to really, the way to test the value of it all is to actually organize a class or do a research institute or whatever, but it can be as simple as a class. But first is we need to kind of figure out what we are doing ourselves. So it started off, and now I'm going to the example, as this Stuart who shared a little table, and I'll call it sometimes the ULM table. This is an abbreviation for Umbleby, Lissac, and Muller. And they actually did already some important work, because they kind of listed some of the questions that are important. And what I found particularly helpful was they immediately kind of said, what's the purpose? Why are we doing this? And then they suggested data. And then, for instance, Kent Myers, we need to include level of analysis. Then Larry Richard said unit of analysis. Then there is what are the methods we use. Then the very important, what are the assumptions, probable consequences. But then if I go back to Lute pointed also out we need to have an understanding of the history of cybernetics, and whether we all look in a similar way to the history of cybernetics. So what I'm doing here is Lute kind of introduced the term table of content, but it could have been called the table of questions, because it's really, each one of the items here is a question. And I try to organize the questions just following Stuart, in terms of that we want to solve a problem. And so this, the purpose of a table of content is to just list the questions, like a table of content that just lists the heading. So that's the reason I stuck with table of content. So then some people already gave their answers, and actually we had already the answers of Stuart and Michael Lissac. And now what happened here? Yeah.
Could you show that?
Yeah, I'm at the moment I'm showing you Michael Lissac, Carl Muller.
No, you're not yet.
No, we don't see it.
No.
Okay, it says screen sharing, and it says tentative.
You share the wrong screen. You are sharing the text, video clip screen for the moment.
I'm still at the video. Yeah.
Yeah.
I apologize. Oh, I apologize. I see the point. Yeah. So I'll stop. I hadn't realized this. Yeah. Okay. So I'll just go back a little.
Yeah.
So
it's okay.
Yeah. So I had started with. I now understand your your question about an example. So it starts with the page of one-page description. It says something, things to do now, and then what to do later. So, and then I made this the table of content. Now the table of content was for the sole purpose of listing the questions, and then I introduced the answers, the tentative
Someone needs to
answers.
mute. Someone needs to mute.
Yeah.
Mute.
Okay.
So here are the tentative answers that were given by Edmundo, Larry, and Myers, and these
Do you want
were
to read
the,
a few? Want to read a few of those so we get a flavor of it?
yes, but Kent, are you on the line? Maybe why don't you read your answers?
Yes, I'm simply pointing out that the concepts are great, but I want to see them in action, and that's the only way we can sort of like attract people to what we're doing. You know, so I would say my purpose would be follow through with applications. That's the only way to test.
You have to change your microphone. It's ununderstandable. It's enormous noise.
Noise? Oh. Well, I don't know how to change. Should I speak less loudly or more loudly?
You need to turn your volume down because your volume is much more stronger than everybody else.
My volume down? Okay. Is that better? Is that better?
It's still very bad.
Oh. Well, I'm sorry. I don't have control over it, but I just pointed. I just want to do some studies to demonstrate what we're doing. That's it.
If you take off your visual, then it gets better because then it's less loading the system. If you just take off your video screen.
Okay, I took off my video screen. Does that come out better?
No.
No.
I'm sorry. And we have to listen to you. Let's go on.
Jaimi, yours. Jaimi.
Jaimi's out.
You're muted. Jaimi, you're still.
Yeah. What about Edmundo? Maybe if you could share your answers.
The question and answer.
Edmundo.
Yes, it's here.
Yeah. Lowell had asked me to read it aloud, and I figured out why not let the author read his answers.
Okay, let's take the answer. You listed the answer. Key questions, problems, determination. Oh, now it's moving away.
I was. I'm just showing how the sheet works right now. I froze the questions on the left. I froze the people who answer, and then.
So Edmundo answered, determination of strategies to address the obstacles in the acquisition of learning capabilities in individuals and organizations due to fragile self-reflection or weak control of decision effectiveness. I find it very difficult to understand.
Okay. That was my understanding of the main purpose of our meetings, okay? Trying to design strategies in order to increase learning capabilities in individuals and organizations. I believe that this is the main purpose of cybernetics. The general main purpose, okay?
And what would that increase mean? Is that redundancy or?
Excuse me, Lut?
Is the increase, is that the production of redundancy? New options?
New possibilities that could arise from the acquisition of learning. Learning capabilities means here the capacity to learn to learn.
So these are agents or institutions, aren't they?
In individuals and institutions, okay?
And firms also?
Yes, why not?
Okay. Thank you.
I'm taking just notes to add later. Now, I think this connects with what Kent was saying also, the thinking of humans as continuously learning, and that we never stop learning, and how to like amplify that attitude of continuous learning.
Yeah.
Can we, as an example, move to Kent's answers, Jaimi?
Yes, I will add that as a comment. Kent is here again.
Kent, are you there?
Hello.
I'm here, but I don't know why it works with all other meetings, but I'm apparently microphone is not working well.
No, that's a problem. Okay, let's read it. We claim that second-order cybernetics is useful because it offers more insights about how things actually work. My purpose would be to demonstrate that assertion rather than continue to make claims. I believe what's to demonstrate assertion. What do you mean with that?
I think he means to literally like set up an institution or an organization to do a project and demonstrate it.
Okay.
Is that, Ken, could you maybe do yes or no?
Apply it, do a study, not hard to understand. Apply it. Applied epistemology is really saying.
Yeah. Does that, I understand that Kent is saying express a frustration that things are maybe a little too theoretical and or too stuck in that first stage, and to say we really need to go to the practical realm to demonstrate the difference.
Why don't we dwell on that and get some response from participants here? What would it mean to do what Kent was suggesting? Is what project, what aspect would be tangible where we could deploy our bridging terminology, techniques, and tools?
Why is that not normal research?
In a sense, we are doing research of research, I would say, or what Larry says is the thinking about thinking. So we're looking at a paradigm of science that may not be the only paradigm that's needed to deal with complexity.
I think Kent is also maybe connecting between the divide between theory and then application, and as a cycle that's seen in management. So we develop a theory and now we test the theory and then the theory gets applied, but somehow it never gets to the application. And by the time it gets to the application, the theory may be already outdated. So for instance, it assumes a slowly changing world and the world is rapidly changing. And just the
So
way
I assume that what we apply is cybernetics, isn't it? Cybernetics. So what would we apply? What would be a question?
All right. So, Lut, you then actually really emphasized the importance of adding that third table or an extra table that everyone needs to look at, is that they kind of say, what do we mean by these various terms that we use? And beginning with cybernetics. Now I think it's called first order versus second order cybernetics. And so Jason is the one who filled it all out, and then Edmundo also gave some definitions, but I think that anyone looking at it can already at least find one term that they maybe would have defined differently. Or I don't know, maybe everyone, I'm assuming that. So here is a reference to what Lowell said, that Lowell said they got Heinz von Förster coming to the Macy meetings to kind of try to organize it a little, or do something to kind of accelerate the process of coming up with some common terminology, and that we kind of need to decide what is going to be our common terminology. And the one thing I already noticed is whether or not we should include a third order and a fourth order cybernetics. And the majority of people seem to say no. And some seem to even think that second order is already too much, that we should just come up with a better definition of cybernetics altogether. And Igor was the one, I think, who brought up. So, but then Stuart, you mentioned the third and the fourth order cybernetics, and now the question is, just what are we going to do with the people who do that first? I mean, like a decision needs to be made. So Stuart, since it all started as your table, could you maybe give some perspective on this question of terminology?
I don't think Stuart's here.
He is here, yeah.
Is it? Okay.
Yeah, but his microphone is muted, and
So I think
Here
I'm
he is.
unmuted now. You can
Yeah.
hear me?
yes.
Okay, well, the notions of third order cybernetics and fourth order cybernetics have been introduced by other people. And I mentioned that Vladimir Levsky in Russia has been developing the notion of third order cybernetics. And then Bernard mentioned an earlier paper by Baker and somebody else, I forget.
Oxer and Kenny.
Yes, okay. And then Matt Millet has introduced the notion of fourth order cybernetics, by which he means the environment and social responsibility for maintaining the environment. So it's sort of like, you think about designing a system, and then you think about including the observer, and thinking about the observer, and then you think about the social system. Third order cybernetics seems to be primarily concerned with the social context. The Russians approached that point of view from various Russian philosophers. But when I read what the Russians are talking about, it reminds me of the early 1600s in Europe, where you have philosophers in England, France, Germany, trying to develop ways of creating a self-sustaining society that's not an authoritarian system. So you have Locke and Hume and Rousseau and so forth. And that's, their philosophy was sort of incorporated into constitutional systems, like in the United States, the French Revolution, and so forth.
Yeah, that's
so
clear.
if you think of it in terms of looking at a problem, like designing something like a large system, and then you think about including the observer and the observer's value system, and then you think about the social context and will the government close down your operation or not? And then you think about the environment, and if you disturb the environment so much, then that's going to mess things up. So those are the distinctions that other people have brought up, and that's sort of my quick summary of it. There is, however, another set of categories that I've become thinking about, mainly from reading the Cabrera's book. And Derek, I think it's mostly, has introduced this notion of DSRP, by which he means distinctions, systems, by which he means parts and whole, relations, which is cause and effect, and then perspectives or point of view. That's, I think, where philosophy comes in. When I read what the Cabreras had written in their DSRP system, it reminded me of another little schema that I came up with a while back that uses academic disciplines. These these terms that the Cabreras use, distinctions, systems, relations, and perspectives, are not based in excuse me, academic disciplines. But one day I was thinking about systems science and systems theory, and I realized that the fundamental element in a system analysis can be quite different. For example, you can have variables, which would be economics, physics, and so forth, or you could have values, which would be psychology and philosophy, mostly. And then you have groups, the second one is ideas. So you have an idea. And then you have groups and events. Now let me explain it this way. Let's say you're trying to improve society and you want to know what's going on in society. So you collect some data in the form of variables. And you say, okay, what's increasing, what's decreasing? What are my goals? How do I get there? You think about that for a while and you come up with an idea like, well, maybe we should do more of this. And you think that's a pretty good idea, but how do you implement it? Well, you have to get support for it. Maybe some funding, maybe pass a piece of legislation. You got to get a group together. So you have variables, then ideas, then groups, and then events. An event would be starting a corporation or passing a piece of legislation, setting up a new institution. And then you go around again and you say, well, how is this new entity, this new institution doing? Well, you collect some variables, come up with another idea. And so what I'm suggesting is that I think that's sort of the way social change happens. You study the system, you come up with an idea, you get some support from a group, and then you create a new institution, that's an event, and then you monitor it. And you go around that circle several times. Now, what I find interesting is that that's not taught in any social science discipline. In fact, the variables are in economics, the ideas are in anthropology or psychology, something. Groups, that's sociology and political science. Events, that's history and law. So in a sense, the social sciences have divided up the process and nobody's brought it all together. So that would be a role for systems theory or cybernetics to show how the different disciplines fit together. Now, another variation on that would be to say that in the engineering disciplines, you start off with physics. Okay, everybody starts off with physics, which is a general theory of matter and energy. But then you specialize in mechanical, electrical, aeronautical, civil engineering. But in the social sciences, you go straight into the disciplines. You either choose economics or psychology or anthropology or political science. There's no common foundation, although they take courses in other fields. So that's why I think cybernetics has a role to provide a general theory of control and communication. And then you go in to specialize into economics, psychology, political science, anthropology. And so then you have two parallel fields. You have the matter-energy field, the material world, that's physics and engineering. And then you have the social sciences, which deals with control and communication. And then you have disciplines there. But that's not the way
scientists will not accept it.
Excuse me?
Most social scientists will not accept it.
Of course not. Because they want to be autonomous. They want to have their own field. They don't want to be an offshoot of something else.
Yes,
but who knows? Maybe in the future.
That gets back to your interdisciplinarity. I mean, that whether people truly want to be interdisciplinary or whether it's posturing to get money.
You get it's easier to get money when you're disciplinary than when you are interdisciplinary. That's really an empirical thing. So most organizations are interdisciplinary organized.
Luke, your volume is down.
I'm sorry. Go ahead. I need to do some repair. Of course, I'm sorry. That's something else. So it's usually disciplinarity is usually easier than interdisciplinarity, and I organized when I was not yet with retirement. I organized for the University of Amsterdam a common freshman program, and the best thing I could do for the students is let them see that the political scientist and the economist could explain to each other why it was completely wrong what the other was saying.
Yeah, so, academics are good at that.
So why
start off from different starting points for different assumptions?
Yes.
What was interesting when I was an undergraduate at Vanderbilt, we had Western civilization, where everyone was supposed to learn about Western civilization. I helped organize a walkout because we had, 750 people in a big auditorium, and literally the professor was going to sleep because he gave the lecture so many times. And we all walked out and he never knew it, and he woke up and it was to an empty auditorium. But anyway, the issue is, Western civilization was a core phenomenon for many years. What Lute was saying is there a core systems thinking? Because I think the people in the late 60s and 70s were saying, it's not as relevant to what we did in the past. What do we need to have the tools to create a different future? And how do you need to think in order to do that? And that would be an interesting program, because Lute said before he did a systems course at University of Amsterdam. What would that look like?
So the core of the course was to teach students to make a choice for a specialization. And it was a collaboration between the natural sciences, the biological sciences, and the social sciences. And the theme which we agreed upon was entropy and organization. So it is really core to cybernetics. And it was a pleasure to see people being completely convinced that the other was completely the bottom line. There is no common ground. There is only the only thing which we have in common is a bit of math.
Could I interject here a comment or two?
Yes.
Go ahead.
Okay. Sure. First of all, I think that I would just add a small correction to Stuart's history, although I in general agree with his comment on the historical development. I do believe in about 1998 or 99, I published a paper at the Namur conference on third order cybernetics from the perspective of biochemistry, and based on my experience working in really the biochemistry of the cell, and how a cell anticipates and communicates its particular needs, wants, and desires in order to survive and to prosper. Shortly after that time, because of categorical considerations, I stopped using the term third order cybernetics because I found the entire language of cybernetics to be inadequate to express my desires, my wants, my needs, to interface the concepts of feedback and feed forward into the natural sciences, into the languages of the natural sciences. So the issue then of these different disciplines has been under, from my perspective, under investigation now for roughly 3 or 4 decades because of the limitations of language and the limitations of our ability to communicate with one another. So this underlying notion of control and communication depends on how capable people are with languages. And of course, you can think of languages in terms of Russian, German, Chinese, Japanese, etc. Or you can think of the language of the different disciplines.
The jargons, the jargons.
Yes, yes. Well, but they are more than jargons, and Lut. They're symbol systems that have been developed from very logical premises, at least within the range of my interest, which is from basically from mathematics to medicine, which is somewhat different than the social sciences or the, if you would, the engineering perspective of it.
Yeah,
so
we can clearly see the history of those divisions, yeah? So we know that psychology emerged in the second half of the 19th century, and that people like Wundt and people like that were the founding fathers.
Each of these disciplines has its own particular history of development, and coming with that history of development has been their use of logical terms to describe that. And part of this whole issue is how do you separate out the meanings that these different disciplines use for the same terms or for different terms? But within this context, and in the last roughly 40 years, the individual symbol systems that have been developed and matured have been logically distinctive, so that the distinction of the engineering sciences and their purposes versus the distinctions used by the chemists and their purposes, and the distinctions used by the physicians and their purposes are all different.
I want to give an example, which I found always very illuminating. For political scientists, it is not difficult to talk about shortage of energy as a problem. But for a physicist, energy is a conserved
beautiful example. Beautiful example. And correspondingly, I'll give you another example. The question of mass, as opposed to the material sciences, for the physicist, mass is a conserved thing, and it has a particular value as a variable. On the other side, for the chemist, the concept is not of mass, but it is of atoms and the arrangement of atoms. These are very, very different notions of material. And so the logic of physics is remote from the logic of chemistry. The terminology of chemistry is remote from all other terminologies.
Even the difference between chemical physics and physical chemistry can be traced back.
Yes, you can point this back. And these are historical facts that Lut and I are talking about. They're not, how can I say, current philosophical perspectives on this. These are the history of science.
There is Thomas Kuhn's book. Thomas Kuhn's book, this example of chemical physics and physical chemistry is in the structure of scientific revolutions.
Mm-hmm.
So
within this context, well, let me make one more sentence, and then I'll finish. I'm finished with what I wanted to my interjection, and that is that these different symbol systems that have been that have emerged in Western civilization And there are basically about 6 of them that are important. The first of all, the alphabet. Secondly, the number system. These two almost co-emerged in ancient times. Thirdly is the development of the chemical symbol system, and then there's the genetic system, and then there is the notion of social symbols, and if you would, semiotics as interpretation of signs. And these all have a different logic associated with them. So with that, I end my rant and return back to the general discussion.
Yeah,
Thank you, Jerry. This was very clear.
May I also comment on that, Jerry? Thank you very much for that, because I see this is one of the roles of cybernetics to be a transdiscipline, in that it's given away many concepts and ideas to different disciplines and shown that there are similarities as well as differences, but also as a meta-discipline, a discipline about disciplines, it can, as you have just done, characterize the differences between the disciplines in great detail, tracing the historical path. This is wonderful scholarship. And I don't see, this is part of the purview of cybernetics as the science of control and communication. It's clarifying communication. So, but what I'd like to, before I have to leave very soon, I'd just like to make a general comment about Jaimi's spreadsheet and the project that's been described so far. I'm trying to get any bunch of people of the same discipline to talk the same way is very, very difficult. I mean, every discipline out there, including the hard disciplines and mathematics, is a really hodgepodge of subdomains of specialisms. There's no coherent unity for the physics or mathematics or engineering, maybe engineering a bit. But in cybernetics, we have from 20 years ago, I don't know if you can see this, it's one of 2 volumes, the International Encyclopedia of Systems and Cybernetics, very thick book. And for almost every entry, you've got 3 or 4 different variant terms. And I don't know anyone who actually use, well, I use this occasionally, but I'm saying it'll be very, very, I'm just dubious of the idea that within our group, we can find consensus and coherence. I think we can learn from each other individually and enrich our ideas. We may be over ambitious to think that we can come up with some kind of shared curriculum. That's I don't want to be a pessimist, but I feel pessimistic.
Du choc des opinions jaillit la vérité.
So
Du choc des opinions jaillit la vérité.
La vérité.
From our meeting of opinions, the truth will follow.
Well, there is actually another objective here, and that was briefly discussed with other people. So there was a great flurry of emails, but a lot of interesting stuff was shared in those emails, that people were really telling what they were thinking. And that it would be wonderful if we had a graduate student or someone else, doesn't have to be a graduate student or a student, who could go through those emails and actually like organize what was being communicated there. And that brings us to a question that Kent brought up, that there are other softwares that may help us out. But just for now, we started with that Excel sheet, but the idea is to move to other software. But for that to happen, we need someone who's willing to be the shepherd of that software. And
The software, Jaimi, the software to do that with is the type of NVivo.
I'm sure we'll all learn a lot if we go down that route.
Well,
I'm just skeptical.
It is there are choices, but the real thing is to find someone who's willing to just be in charge of making sure it looks clean, all the formats are similar, and who transfers from the emails to the whatever the software is, and who's willing to guide us while we're learning the software, for those who are interested.
Yeah, just an assistant, not a serious student studying the disciplines, to make sense of what's in the tables.
and in the exchange.
But what is interesting about, in talking with Heinz von Forster, what Margaret Mead did was set up Heinz as sort of the collector of the meetings and the transcripts. And that gave him such a perspective that he was then propelled to create the biological computer laboratories, because he understood the interconnection between what Bateson was saying and Wiener was saying and Mead was saying. And what we're trying to do in cybernetics is step back and deal with what Jerry is talking about. Is there a symbol system of symbol systems that we need to be understanding in our present day so that we don't become trapped in our historical webs? And so its ability to step back and give that ability to see that we are prisoners in our histories. And that's where I think the control mechanism goes beyond direct control in terms of control by redundancy, the built-in history of what we have become by what we were in our becoming.
Well,
Very nice.
something applies to each of us individually in hugely rich and complex ways. But it's interesting to converse. By the way, my recollection is it was Warren McCullough who asked Heinz to edit the proceedings with Margaret as a fellow editor with someone else, Toiber, I think. Anyway,
yeah.
Point taken.
Good.
Lowell, I would say make a slight correction to your general viewpoint, which I agreed with, and that is these histories are there. They no more entrap us than they do jail us. I mean, they're there. Everyone has access to them. These histories and these symbol systems are the basis for emergence of new forms, of new information. And so the problem is in some way to compose these various concepts and ideas and histories into something useful for humanity. And if you want to call this cybernetics, that's fine with me. I call it, give it a name. That's important. A good name is very important. But the basic objective of using these histories and these symbol systems is to be creative, innovative, productive, and to contribute to the overall development of our social systems. Okay, that's my correction to what you said, Lowell.
Thank you.
What I've learned as an outsider joining this conversation in August or last weekend of July is that there are a lot of papers out there that describe the histories, and they're extremely informative. And the Constructivist Foundation journal, I think, has the format for the future, because everyone can access the articles. You don't need to pay anything, and then you pay if you are appreciative. So it's all there, but I was interested. I had a stake in it. I mean, because I kind of decided that Popper is best understood as a system scientist in the closet. But the question is, how do we convince someone who is at the outside and is not really aware of this conversation? And there it might be useful to entice some young person or middle-aged person that is willing to actually work on that table and actually learn while he's doing it what it is all about and what the challenges are for communication. Because I have to say, I already discovered one thing where I was using a very different conception, and I'm still trying to wrap my head around it, and that is the definition of science. Like, for instance, I've decided there is not a science 1 and a science 2. I think there is good science and bad science. and we just have to say, we just have to agree on what's the original purpose of science, and then come up with like one definition, and not say, and this is bad science, and that's it. And then also listen to what everyone else is saying about science, because this word is thrown around like crazy, and a lot of people are hiding behind it and say, we're scientists, so don't question what we say. And so that is personally where I see as a specific project where cybernetics can make a contribution right now. But it needs
Jaimi,
to decide.
this is a good example where of language in use. The word science came into popular use in English only a few centuries ago, and you've got Latin and Greek roots to the ideas, as well as natural philosophy and so on. So these are scholarly adventures, and no doubt there are people out there doing this kind of thing who have already done that kind of thing. But we as cyberneticians can recognize that these are contributions to the cybernetic goal of clarifying things, unifying things, elucidating things as the science and art of control and communication. So yes, by all means, let's question everything.
What I think is a challenge to us is Peter Lewis today said he wants to unsubscribe from our group. He was the Cellular One person. He said, I'm more of a technologist, and I'm getting more emails from the Club of Remy than anyone else. And it's overpowering. And so we really need to be coming down to how do we take our discussions and move it towards action, what Kent has been talking about, or a project that Jaimi has been talking about. And that's really the challenge for us at the club, is to figure out how do we move our discussions into a public arena, or at least a educational arena where learning occurs.
But if I might make a comment, I'm really surprised I'm attributing a different meaning. Like a Cellular One technology high up in the ranking who doesn't know how to sort his emails, because it's very simple to set up a separate folder and then there is no problem with the emails. So there is maybe something else going on, and that what we're doing is just something very different from what he is doing. He wants a finished product, and we're in the process of developing the product, and he will be ready to join once we have our developed product. So
just an echo to Lowell. I've quoted this in an email with respect to what we're up to. The first principle of war, the most important principle of war, certainly in UK military doctrine, is selection and maintenance of the aim. So to try to agree an aim in a reasonably concise format would be a jolly good beginning, and then to refer back to that, maintain regularly that aim, so we don't drift away from it. But I'm also worried that the conversation group today, we had about 12 or 15. I mean, to do effective communication in this group, we have to learn about each other. We have to learn, this takes, again, it takes time. We can manage perhaps to get to know 6 or 7 people in regular meetings. But beyond that is very difficult. Obviously, some people are lurking, as it were, but I think one of the challenges is for us to learn from each other, listen to each other, and respect. And okay, we go around the same circles sometimes, but eventually we'll start to understand each other in deeper and better ways. And Lute and I have been doing this for 20 odd years.
Yes.
And we're still getting somewhere. That's great.
Yeah, and the notion of action, for me it is the case that this morning I have worked on disruption indicators. And that's cybernetics, and it's informed by cybernetics. But maybe, Lowell, you want collective action.
Ultimately, we need to get towards collective action, I would think, in this group, because the challenges with our political thinking, our public media, our political science is inadequate to deal with complexity. And the hope I see in cybernetics is going beyond that, a barrier of the everyday thinking, our consciousness, our purpose, into more of a participatory learning environment where we look at the boundaries and we understand how to design those boundaries. If I could just summarize what I heard from Larry, we are suffering from the Descartes, I think, therefore I am, which is just my personal consciousness. What Larry is saying, I think, I'm thinking, and that is a recursive process that looks at the way I design. So I think I can now design. And so, yes, I see it trying to go towards a purpose of design and getting the tools, not with an end product, but with the tools, processes that allow that.
I do distinguish between a way of thinking and thinking. And the way of thinking arises in the social domain. So I use the word thinking when I want to talk about an unfolding or a churning of a set of concepts and the connections among them. A way of thinking is the pattern of connecting, pattern of unfolding, churning, and connecting. And that pattern is what is carried in our shared language and in our culture and in our social systems.